Are cravings for alcoholism just part of your life, even years after you leave the addiction? Well, if you adhere to AA philosophy, they possibly might be, but a holistically healthy life will keep cravings to an absolute minimum, and I'll tell you how to handle the occasional ones that may still occur. What is the biggest threat to the former alcoholic's cure? The reason that most in Alcoholics Anonymous do not stay sober? It is the craving for alcohol. Of course it is. Your body wants the substance that it had for years and even decades in vast amounts. It isn't happy that you pulled the plug on Dr. Feelgood's outlet, even though that feeling was physically and mentally destroying you. I remember very well in the initial stages of my recovery on the road to cure. How am I never going to drink a beer again? I couldn't picture it. I couldn't picture being completely dry for a week, let alone the rest of my life. Are you trying to tell me never at a party, never on a Friday night, never at an after-work get-together, never when I just feel blue, never again am I going to pop that cap to drink the liquid bottle of Jolly Joy? Yep, and there's no illusion here. It doesn't matter if you're in an AA room, doing it on your own with my method, or sitting in the luxurious rehab center of Passages in Malibu. It doesn't matter what philosophy you adopt, what higher power you use, or what meds you take. If you are an alcoholic and quit it, you are going to have unbelievable cravings for the prior substance for months, especially the first 30 to 45 days, which I state is the second phase of my created program, following the initial acute withdrawal of 5 days. I would like to tell you that my method avoids these cravings, but it doesn't. No method does. But here's where the former addict fails. He doesn't realize that these cravings are not forever. They aren't even heavy for a year. The cravings are mouth-watering, clenched fist, can't get the thought out of my head, only to about that 30 to 45 day mark. Then they start to subside, and they'll continue to fluctuate to the 6-month mark. But at 6 months is when they really start to lessen in frequency, intensity, and duration. The protracted withdrawal phase to cure is up to 2 years, but after the year mark, the cravings are starting to be a thing of the past. Now, many members sitting in the infamous rooms of AA will beg to differ. You're telling people a lie. We still have cravings, because we're always alcoholics. You don't know what you're talking about, Charles. That might be true for those in AA. Many will continue to fight cravings in AA after the 6-month mark because they're sitting in the AA rooms most nights. There are certain triggers that will initiate a craving for the former alcoholic. There are triggers that can initiate an intense one, which may last for hours, even years after the substance abuse has ceased. They are rare, but they happen. But these triggers are all over the place in the rooms. I said before in a previous episode that at 11 months clean, I had a severe craving twice upon leaving an AA meeting both times. What does that tell you about the propagation of emotional health in your circle, AA? The reason that the AA meetings will not reduce cravings in the former alcoholic is because of the makeup of the AA meeting. First, excessive sugar, nicotine, and caffeine will induce cravings, the very substances members consume in vast quantities in every meeting. I have said that during the second phase of recovery, the newly sober may need to use whatever he needs just to get to that day 45. But at the end of this phase is when the return to holistic health begins, physically and emotionally. You do not become a chain smoker to maintain sobriety, nor consume a quart of ice cream a day. Because when your body's sugar levels keep fluctuating, the neurochemistry remembers the ultimate sugar drop, alcohol, and gives you a craving to attempt to fix this want. This is why it is so important to develop a clean diet with minimal coffee, no cigarettes, and minimal sugar intake, so this craving isn't being initiated. Second, negativity will induce cravings. If you're going to keep telling your story of the horrific life you lived as an alcoholic years into sobriety, you are placing your mind back in that context. And the brain remembers this and gives you a craving since you did decide to take it there. That story time with AA, this should be something in the first month or two of recovery. From that point, those memories should be placed in a storage bin in the basement. If you need to keep reminding yourself of the horror of an addict, to keep from being an addict, then you have not holistically healed at all. This is another reason the method of AA is so ineffective. That protocol is practically begging its members to consume the offending substance again, and many do, noted by the AA failure rate. But let's say you did take that alternate approach, far from the rooms, to gain cure from your former addiction. Do you still have to worry about cravings rearing their ugly heads at times? The short answer is yes. Cravings still happen after the 6-month mark and even years later into sobriety. Once you make it past the 2-year protracted withdrawal phase, they will be very minimal in frequency and intensity. But sometimes, out of the dark sky under the moon, they spring up out of nowhere. And everyone would like to know why. After all, one does have years of sobriety now. Hasn't he earned the right to be rid of cravings forever? Yes, he should have that benefit. We all should, but it's not always so. There do exist triggers that still reside deep in the gray matter, which will make these cravings occur. Once one is an alcoholic, there are certain things he'll have to deal with for the rest of his life. AA is partially right on that tenet. And occasional cravings is one of those things. The good news is they're infrequent, but one can guard himself as much as he can to make these occurrences as rare as possible. As I said, once past 6 months, the cravings really begin to nosedive and begin to bring the person to a state of normality that he probably hasn't experienced since before his former addiction began. The first 5 days of acute withdrawal, it wasn't so much the cravings he was fighting, but the ungodly sickness from the sudden cessation of alcohol. He knows that a quick trip to the liquor store will solve this sickness, but the real cravings begin in the second phase, once the debris from the initial blast at ground zero has cleared. For now, you're not going through this sometimes life-threatening shockwave. But once your system settles, suddenly it wants the very substance that just induced Hiroshima on his being. For most, somewhere between day 30 and 45 clean is the next battle that will determine the outcome of the war. Most don't make it past this phase because of those cravings. They are intense and mostly continuous. I vividly remember getting an hour here and there without them, until I passed a street sign with a woman holding a glass of wine, or driving by that neon sign where John Barleycorn lived. There is no surefire method in AA or my program that will make this phase easier. As I said in my book, either you're going to develop the willpower to truly leave alcohol behind, or you're going to remain an addict. That's it, and that's all. Day 45 is the first day I could say I felt good since I ended it with alcohol. I only had a few episodes of minimal cravings that day, no anxiety, and no insomnia that night. I transitioned into the next phase, which would take me to 6 months. At day 45 is when the cravings become more episodic. I started having hours at a time without them now, and when they came, I knew I could get through them, for I had before when they were more frequent and more intense. I knew I could keep repeating this new habit. I ignored them till they went away. In this phase, they would usually last now 30 minutes to an hour instead of hours most of the day. By 6 months, towards the end of this phase, I was only having a few of these symptoms a day, and many now were minimal in intensity and lasted under 30 minutes. And they simply become less and less over time. I was on a physical fitness program now, had quit smoking, had a clean diet, with very little craving-inducing additives. If one continues a holistic recovery I prescribe, then the symptoms will only continue to fade until they're almost non-existent. Today, at nearly 2 decades sober, if I have a craving, it usually lasts a minute or two and is slight at worst. Usually. Then there exists the trigger. A trigger will bring the rare but intense craving. It does happen, and it's happened to me years after the last drop of barley. But why? It is great that mostly there are no cravings now, and the ones that do occur are very mild. So what makes this Richter scale hitting about a 12 when it does happen on that rare occasion? Neuroplasticity is something that has been largely studied only in recent decades in the medical profession. The worn pathways in our brain that can lead to repetitive thoughts and feelings from past behaviors. Association with a behavior can lead to a black déjà vu of sensations past. This is true for the former alcoholic as well. There are a lot of behaviors associated with alcoholism, usually not admirable traits either. That's why it's imperative that you rid yourself of the toxic people you associated with in those alcoholic days, which were most likely many. As positive people usually do not hang around alcoholics. You do not want to be reminded of your past neurologically by continuing to be around those who are a mirror of what you once were. You will lose friends once you become sober, I promise you, and that is necessary to minimize these triggers. If those types of people want to continue to be your friend, then they should change their lives as well. But I can give you 2 examples of simple associative behaviors that led to gigantic cravings that lasted for hours, years after I was sober. The first was at over 3 years sober. I was house sitting for a friend on the island of Sitka, Alaska. I had learned recently that my grandmother, who I self-estranged from for a quarter of a century prior, had passed away at 95. I was treated pretty badly by my grandmother and was already a kid at that time who had just spent 3 years being treated the same at home and school before I was deposited there, far away from my original home. The house I was sitting for had a 12-pack of the really good stuff sitting in the pantry. The news of her death suddenly brought back the long ago years, the origin of which the later addiction probably began. It was the first time my mouth watered for the substance since those initial months of recovery. It didn't go away in a few minutes either. It didn't go away for hours. It was so bad that I went ahead and checked the pets and left the house until the next morning. That craving lasted long after I returned to my apartment. The second time was when I was training in a Muay Thai camp in Thailand. I was locked away in this camp for 8 weeks training with my longtime art of Thai boxing. I was fine all the way up to the last week when I served as a corner man for one of our fighters in the neighboring island of Koh Samui. After the fight, we went to a bar, which usually no longer had an effect on me as I was now 5 years sober, but there was a familiar atmosphere there. For when I was training for years at a school in Indianapolis, alcohol was a huge part of my life. I wasn't a late-stage alcoholic yet, but definitely working my way there. It seems impossible that one could train for fights and public events, which were school-run and low-level unsanctioned only, but still legitimate full-contact bouts, and yet at the same time be an alcoholic. But many athletes of all levels, even in the pros, have substance abuse problems. The will to train overrides a lifestyle. But suddenly in Thailand, a craving ran over me like the proverbial freight train. I felt like I was in month 1 of recovery, it was so intense. The remembrance of my own fighter days, no matter how insignificant they were, combined with the buzz of the typical expat indulging environment, similar to my time in Europe, erupted a volcano flowing the lava of extreme want. It lasted for about 6 continuous hours, all the way until I went to bed at 3 a.m. But when I awoke, it was gone. Those were the 2 times that the intense craving came out of nowhere and lasted more than a few minutes since I exited the 2-year protracted withdrawal phase. So how did I handle those occurrences? I simply kept the contract I mentally signed with myself day 1. I adhered to a non-negotiable pact of never touching alcohol again. During those 2 times of those very extreme symptoms, I thought to myself, how many cravings had I gone through in those first few months of recovery? Those occurrences passed, and I knew these occurrences would pass as well. I equate conquering these infrequent bouts with that ghost of John Barleycorn like paddling a surfboard away from the beach. A wave comes, you lie flat and just go over it as it passes until you get to the calm waters again. And remember what acute withdrawal was like in those first 5 days. Do you really want to go through that again? Probably not. Keeping a holistic program of physical fitness and emotional fitness, as I describe in my book and episodes, will keep these triggers to a minimum. And if you continue to advance your being and career, or whatever side hustles you choose, this will continue to distance yourself from that once person who was an addict, which should only now be a mirage in the distance. Meetings in AA will produce only more cravings than necessary, in which the outcome is one who is never cured. But if this intense craving does hit you, just remember, you've outlasted them before and you can again. It will most likely be gone in a few hours. So you just ride over it and keep your contract. These episodes will be infrequent if you continue to keep your physical and emotional state in that state of holistic health. Things happen in life, whether you are an addict or not. You deal with unpleasant times just like everyone else now. And this includes an infrequent remembrance of the past that leads to this craving. You ride over it and then continue that progression to advancement of self. Now, if this episode gelled with you, go ahead and check out the playlist card at the end of the video. And check out my own memoir of a long 2,600-mile trek of recovery, The Shepherd and the Running Wolf, A Path to Forgiveness on the Pacific Crest Trail. Link is in the video description as well as the channel page banner. And remember, you made the contract, now keep it. Be sober at sundown, and I will see you at the next sunrise.